CBI. Today we're going to talk about true cost of patents, which is a paper that Jonathan and I are working on. And so we're going to try to do three things in our talk today. The first thing is I'm going to give you an overview of conventional wisdom behind the economics of patents. That is to say, I'm going to give you the conventional explanation for how we determine how long, how broad a patent should be. Should it last 17 years? Should it last 20 years? Should it last 23 years? I'll do a little bit of that. Then we're going to explain why it's wrong. And so Jonathan will do that. And then I'll end by giving you a sense of how you should set optimal patent length or optimal patent breadth, given the conventional wisdom is wrong, but using the sort of logic that we're going to tell you about. Okay, so let me begin with a quick cost-benefit analysis of patents. So what do patents do? Their main purpose is to give, or the way they operate is to give an inventor, an innovator, exclusive rights to sell their product, to sell their innovation. And the idea is, with those exclusive rights, you'll make extra profits because you're the only person selling the product, and those profits, those monopoly profits, are an incentive for you to do the research in the first place. They provide ex ante incentives. Now, what is the cost of monopoly rights? Well, exactly those same monopoly profits. Typically, it's thought in order for an innovator to generate monopoly profits, they have to charge a high price for the product. A price that's higher than the cost of them actually producing the product. And that difference is going to be the extra profits that you make. So that's going to price some people out of the market. And that the people that are going to be priced out are people that value the product more than the marginal cost, the cost of production, but they can't afford or not willing to pay the high price that the innovators charge. So think iPhone. Okay? And when you price those people out of the market, that's a loss. So all of us should have an iPhone. And that's the basic trade-off. You're going to get greater innovation. That's called dynamic efficiency. That's the first point. But you're going to get some foregone consumption. And that's an inefficiency. It's called a static inefficiency. So the standard trade-off in patent law, patent economics, is dynamic efficiency, which is good, versus static inefficiency, which is bad. You balance the two. Make sure the marginal increment of patent, or that is to say additional increment patent, generates a marginal increment in innovation that's equal to the marginal cost of having extra deadweight loss, extra loss consumption. So let me show this to you in a standard economics 101 type figure. Here is, I'm going to show you demand curves, really, and a supply curve of sorts. This is quantity demanded, this is quantity of a product. Okay, let's say it's an innovative product. So think iPhones again. This is the price of the product. So let's suppose that the innovator decides to behave like a competitive firm. You just have a competitive firm. What does a competitive firm do? Well, the competitive firm is going to say, I'm going to sell my product because I'm competitive. I'm going to sell my product at how much it costs me to produce the product. If I tried to sell it for more, I would not get any business because there would be another firm out there that would sell for a little bit less than me. Okay? So if my cost of production, and I'm going to call that marginal cost, that's the unit cost of production, is this line. I'm just going to assume for simplicity that it's just flat. That I can use 10 units of iPhone, 100 units of iPhone, 1,000 units of iPhone, all at the same marginal cost, right? Incremental cost. So I've got a flat line. If I've got to produce at cost, that means I will keep on producing until I intersect with the demand curve. Okay? This is the demand curve for this product. The higher is the price of the product, the less you're going to see demand for the product. The lower is the price of the product, the more you're going to see demand. That means you have a downward sloping demand curve. At the intersection of this cost curve and this demand curve is what a competitive firm prices at. If I priced a little bit more, the next person would not be willing to pay because their valuation is lower than the cost of additional unit production. If I charge a little bit less, well, I could do a little bit better by producing a little bit more because there's an extra person out there that's willing to pay marginal cost to get the goods. One of the nice things about this, that you price at marginal cost, is that consumers are really happy. They're well off. And how much are they well off? Well, if they only have to pay this much, but they value the goods at the level of demand, then they're getting the entire red triangle as shown here as what's called consumer surplus. That's like consumer profits. Okay? That's why competitive pricing is so great for consumers. Okay? We'll call this consumer surplus. Using that's the technical economic term for consumer profits. Okay, what happens when you're a monopolist? Now instead of just being a a widget producer, even if it's the widget is an iPhone, let's imagine that you have an exclusive right, a monopoly right to sell that widget or that iPhone. Well, this is nice for the consumer, but it's not good for you as the owner of the patent. What you want to do is you want to price at a slightly higher price. You want to generate some profits. And so what you'll do is, without getting too technical, you'll price at a slightly higher price. Okay? We'll call it PM for monopoly price to distinguish it from PC, which is the competitive price. And this price will be set so as to maximize your profit. Now, for those of you who want to get technical, it's going to be at the intersection of what's called the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve. In case you took Econ 101, this is just a reminder of that. But the important thing to remember is you price at a higher level just to maximize profits. Now, obviously, that means you're going to decrease your demand a little bit, because if you're selling at a high price, all these guys, they can't afford to buy it. Those are the guys that are going to be priced out of the market. But it's going to be good for you because you're going to get this entire area in profit. So let me show that. The green area is your profits, if you're the innovator. Right? That was better than this. But for the consumer, because the price is higher, only the consumers that can afford it are going to get the product, and we're only going to get their valuations counted as consumer surplus. So what's the consumer profit? What's the consumer surplus? Just this red amount. The really interesting thing here is that because the monopolist is selling at this high price, there's a whole bunch of people over here that were buying under competitive price but are priced out now. This gray triangle, I hope it appears gray to you, this gray triangle is wasted, is foregone consumption. We call this deadweight loss. Okay, that's the inefficiency. That's the static inefficiency. Okay, and what you're basically getting, here's the pros and cons. The great thing is now that you're with monopoly rights, you're getting this green area that induces innovation. That's fantastic. But the downside is you're also getting this gray area where you've got wasted, foregone consumption. People who can afford to get it. That is to say, people who are willing to pay marginal cost to get it, but can't afford it because of the monopoly price. You get this, you lose this. That's your basic trade-off. And so when we try to figure out what is the optimal length of a patent, we kind of do a figure that looks like this. Now here, the x-axis is going to be time, not quantity, and the y-axis is dollar value. And so we can imagine what does the world look like with shorter patents, which is the top figure, or with longer patents. And I've kept the color shadings from the previous graph. With a short patent that only extends to time 1, let's say a 10-year patent, what you'll get is you'll get monopoly profits up until here, the green box. Okay? You get a little bit of consumer surplus, right? Remember this little triangle, but it's not as big as when you had competitive markets. Okay? But as soon as you go off patent, again, competition starts, and so then you jump back to this figure, which is much bigger profits for the consumer, right? Much bigger consumer surplus, and so the overall level of surplus is higher, and that'll continue forever. Okay? And so you think, oh, well, geez, it's got to be that you want shorter life, right? But what you got to figure out is what's the value of this in terms of innovation generated. Because the larger is this, the higher is total surplus. That is to say, see how high this bar goes at the very top? The larger is this figure, the higher this bar will go, although it'll accrue to the consumer. Now, if you go to a longer patent, you get more of this, and you might get a higher bar altogether. And that's the kind of trade-off that you're talking about. Okay? Now, with that, I want to give it over to you. Step back if necessary. But
okay, great. Thanks very much, Noob. So the question is whether there's a way of sort of curing this problem or getting around this fundamental trade-off. So everyone thinks that this is the deal we're making in patents. We're trading off deadweight losses in the short term for production of better products, greater consumer surplus in the long term, right? We are happy that we have iPhones in the long run because people will get to use them, makes them very happy, but in the short run, some people will be priced out, and we think that's a loss. So I guess what Anoop and I want to say is we think that this story is true for a smaller section of patents that people realize, and then in fact, in some very large segments of the sort of innovation economy, we're not actually having to confront this trade-off, or at least we're not having to confront it nearly so starkly. And then in fact, there are mechanisms for eliminating this sort of upfront deadweight loss in a lot of these technological fields. And so the mechanism that we want to talk about is called two-part pricing. Basically, it's a pretty simple idea, right? So it's a scheme for pricing goods such that you get rid of these upfront deadweight losses. And remember that deadweight losses are caused because the monopolist wants to set prices at such a high level that there are going to be some people who are priced out of the market. Some folks just can't afford the iPhone. So how does two-part pricing work? So step one is you charge an initial fee for getting access to a bundle of stuff. And in theory, two-part pricing could be about anything, right? It could be two-part pricing of nuts and bolts. It could be two-part pricing of patent rights, two-part pricing of cars. It just matters that we're bundling a lot of things together and you're getting access to that pool of bundled things. So here we're talking about, say, patent rights. So that might be, I own 10 patents and Anoop owns 10 patents, and if you pay an upfront fee, you're going to get access to our entire bundle of 20 patents, and you can use and license them however you choose. So part one, you charge an upfront price for access to the full bundle, and then part two, you charge an additional fee for every one you want to use. So Anoop and I might say, you want to license our patents, you're going to pay $100 up front, and then for every one of our 20 patents that you'd like, you're going to pay an additional $5 per patent. So an upfront fee and a per unit fee. So what does that accomplish? All right, well, let me give you an example of this first of all. Suppose you're a radio station. You want to play a bunch of songs on the radio. You want to play a dozen songs an hour. Now these songs are obviously copyrighted by someone. Some band or some record label owns the copyright to the song. You have to get a license if you want to play the song. Very difficult and expensive to negotiate all of these licenses, and you have to worry that if everyone is pricing the license to their song at too high of a level, maybe some radio stations will be squeezed out. So one solution is you have a two-part pricing scheme. So you get song owners to pool all their songs together into a gigantic pool, and then you give the radio station, you charge the radio station an upfront price for accessing that big pool of songs, and then a per song price for every additional song that they want to license. So it's just sort of automated. You buy access to the gigantic pool of songs, and then the radio station says, okay, we're going to use 12 of these this hour. Here are 12 unit prices for you to pay you for these 12 songs that we're taking. This is the ASCAP system. ASCAP is American Society for Composers, Authors, and Producers. This is actually how radio stations run their businesses right now. All these songwriters and song producers, people who have copyrights on their songs, decided to pool them all, and so now every radio station in America that wants to play music, they just buy access to these songs through a two-part pricing scheme via the ASCAP system. So it greatly simplified this issue and solved a lot of the problems about, number one, the expense of having to negotiate individual licenses, and then secondly, the fear that if some prices were too high, they would price people out of the market. Okay, so there are some serious advantages to two-part pricing and that sort of thing. So number one, basically what you're doing is you're allowing price discrimination among buyers who value things differently. If you're Apple and you have a patent on the iPhone, and you want to make the most profits you possibly can, what you'd want to do is sell the iPhone at a very high price to someone like Anoop, who values it very highly, and sell it at a much lower price to someone like me, who might value it less. Because if you price it too high, if you price it to capture Anoop, I might not be interested in purchasing it. Now I'm Deadweight Loss. If you price it too low so that you get me in your market, now you're not making enough money off of Anoop because he's getting enormous consumer surplus, and if you're Apple, you don't want that. So what we're really what two-part pricing allows you to do is say to people, well, we know you might value this pool of things differently, so we're going to price it differently for each of you. So imagine a pool of songs. One radio station might want 100 songs, and one radio station might want 2 songs. You're going to allow them to pay different amounts of money, and the way you're doing that is by pricing those songs on a per unit basis once people have purchased access up front. There are 2 requirements, however, for this system to work. Again, the goal is to discriminate among users, but also to avoid these deadweight losses. So the first requirement is the initial access price has to be less than all the buyers are willing to pay to get in, right? So if the cost of accessing the pool of songs in the ASCAP system were too high, then you'd still be pricing some people out of the market. If our $100 that we want to charge for access to our pool is too much, there are still some radio stations that aren't going to buy in. That's not only deadweight loss, but it's also revenue that the companies are not able to capture. That we want to try to avoid pricing people out up front. The second thing is that the per unit price has to be pretty close to the marginal cost of producing the good. Because remember, we're trying to give people access to as much as we possibly can and not price them out of the market. If we're pricing access to each additional unit within the pool too high, then eventually the price for a lot of these units is going to go way up above marginal cost, way up above the competitive level, and again, we're going to be creating deadweight loss and pricing some people out of the market. So in the ASCAP system, the per unit price is actually 0. In this system of radios and songs, once you buy access to the pool of songs, you get any number of songs you want at 0 additional price. So they're just charging one upfront fee, and so long as they're setting that one upfront fee low enough, no one's going to get priced out of the market for radio songs. So we'll do this in diagram form also. I'll let a new see through them, show them to you.
So this is the same figure from before, where we had monopoly pricing. And you can see everything here. First of all, remember the competitive firm with price here. The monopolist, in my previous example, that charged one price for their product, not a two prices or two-part price for the product, would charge here. You see here's the deadweight loss that we talked about earlier. But now let's suppose they can engage in two-part pricing. What would their two-part pricing look like that would, what could it look like in a way that would maximize both profits and efficiency? Well, for one thing, you'd want to set your entry price to be really, really high. You actually want to set your entry price to be such that you capture this entire triangle. Okay? So if we assume that this was demand for, say, one consumer, right? This represented the demand of one consumer. At a very high price, they're going to consume just a little bit. At a very high price, they're going to consume very little. At a medium price, they're going to consume a little bit more. At a low price, they're going to consume a lot. What you want to do is you should figure out what the maximum amount you can charge them is to get all their surplus, and then let them consume how many units they want at marginal cost. So what you're going to do is you're going to set your entry price to be that whole triangle. That whole triangle that was the consumer surplus in the competitive case, it's this thing right here, all the way up there. That's going to be your entry price. And then your unit price is exactly your marginal cost. Okay? That makes sense? So now, you've charged your entry price. Your entry price is that entire triangle, which to you, the innovator, is now profits. By the way, you notice that this is bigger than that box that was created with the single price. Two-part pricing can give you more profits. Okay? And then, for everything else, you just charge marginal cost. Now you notice two interesting things here, beyond the fact that your profits are much larger. One, the consumers get no profits. And the reason is because you've extracted it all with your upfront fee. And then consumers just kind of pay the marginal cost, but that's just the cost of production. Okay? Sometimes that's going to be 0 in the ASCAP case, but it could be positive. The second interesting thing is there's no deadweight loss. Why is there no deadweight loss? Once the consumer has paid this green amount, this green triangle as his upfront fee or her upfront fee, they only face this unit cost as their marginal cost. What are they going to do? They're going to say, well, I'm going to keep on consuming until my demand curve crosses that, so that if I consume any more beyond that point, then I'll be paying a higher price, the marginal cost, than it's worth to me. So I'll just stop right there. And so you're going to get an amount of production that's the same as in the competitive case. And so what two-part pricing does is allow the producer, the innovator, to extract all the profits and make sure that the quantity of production is such that nobody forgoes any consumption at all.
Okay, thanks, John. So these are the two important features of a sort of well-constructed two-part pricing system, right? Number one, you're avoiding deadweight loss entirely. That was sort of half of our big patent trade-off that we discussed in the beginning. If there's some way to avoid that, that's a particularly large deal. And then number two, it's a mechanism for the producer, the firm making the good, to extract even more value out of the users, because now they're figuring out a way to charge a newt more for the iPhone than they're charging me. So we think this is going on in the patent world in a couple of different places, that really capture a large amount of the economic activity surrounding patents. The first is health insurance. So health insurance is a classic two-part pricing scheme. You've got access that you're providing to medical devices, stents and defibrillators and the like, and also prescription drugs, all of which are covered by patents, and you're doing it with a two-part price. The first price, the upfront cost, is the premium that you're being charged to buy into the health insurance system, the healthcare system. And that premium is, drug companies trying to set that so as to capture as much of your surplus value as they possibly can. Or I should say health insurance companies are trying to set it. And then the second price is the copay that you have to pay. So if you want a prescription drug, you already purchased access to the world of prescription drugs when you bought health insurance, and now you're paying a per unit price in order to get each particular drug that you want to buy. And that per unit price is obviously quite low compared with what you'd be paying if you were not covered by health insurance in the first place. So the reason we know that the upfront cost is quite high, but not necessarily too high to price lots and lots of people out, is that 83% of Americans currently have health insurance, and that number will rise when the Obama healthcare plan kicks into effect. So that's one big area where two-part pricing exists. The second large area is this sort of universe of technologies related to computers and semiconductors and electronics, all of which are covered by a variety of mechanisms called patent pools and cross-licensing agreements, which are basically just two-part pricing fees. Okay, so basically what happens is high-tech firms, Silicon Valley type firms, pool their patents together into large pools so that they can charge sort of single prices for access to those pools. And the reason is because there are lots and lots and lots of patents in those fields. You know, your computer, your laptop is probably covered by a couple of thousand patents, actually. It would be overly expensive to try to negotiate a separate license for every single one of those patents. It also might result in prices that are too high and people who are being priced out of the market. So firms that own a lot of these patents, you know, Intel and Texas Instruments, for example, might pool their patents together and create a sort of a single institutional entity that holds all of these patents and then just charge entry fees to get access to that pool of patents. So they charge an upfront fee to get access to the patent pool. There are actually institutions out there that say, we're running a following patent pool. We're running a patent pool on Blu-ray technology. So if you want to build anything related to Blu-ray, just pay an upfront fee. You have access to our pool of all the important Blu-ray patents out there in the world. And then they charge a per unit fee, but just like in the ASCAP system, the per unit fee in basically every patent pool in existence is 0 also. So we know that the per unit fee is not too high because the per unit fee does not exist. So there are not that many patent pools that are actually called patent pools out in the world because the antitrust authorities have cracked down on them in some extent. They're worried about people putting too many patents into patent pools and forcing you to license more patents than you would really want. So the fear is, let's say there are two different ways of making a DVD. You can choose way A or way B. The antitrust division would like you to be able to pick A or B and have there be some competition between these two ways of making a DVD. But if the people who held the patents to way A and the people who held the patents to means B pooled their patents together and said, you can only get access to some of these patents if you buy access to all of them, then we worry that there's sort of collusion and it's restraining competitive behavior. So the antitrust division has cracked down on patent pools per se. There are only about 45 patent pools in existence. But what there are lots and lots and lots of cross-licensing, multilateral sort of patent access agreements. And what are these things? They're just patent pools by another name. Patent pools are very passé in the patent world these days. Everyone wants to do cross-licensing agreements. And so these things have proliferated. It's impossible to know exactly how many of them there are or what sort of what scope they cover because they're all private, but our sense is that they cover a tremendous amount of the sort of high-tech industries, computers, semiconductors, et cetera. So I want to try to make just a little bit of a back-of-the-envelope calculation of how broad a swath of the economy we're talking about here. So here are a list of patents by technological field. So here is a sort of sorting of all the fields in which patents might be granted, and rough estimates based on empirical data of how many patents are being granted in each of those fields. So this is a percentage of patents by field, and this is the actual number. And this is across about the last decade. And these are the guesses as to the number of patents in that field within the last year that has been granted. And so I've highlighted in red here, so you can sort of see it, sort of not. Those fields where we think that either health insurance or patent pools or cross-licensing agreements are basically creating two-part pricing. And as you can see, it's close to 50% of all of the economic activity that's taking place in the world of patents. Close to 50% of all of the patents being granted are being granted in areas in which some two-part pricing mechanism is operating. And that means that almost 50% of the patents are patents that might not be creating any deadweight loss at all. Patents for which this trade-off between upfront deadweight loss and longer-term innovation simply doesn't exist because the upfront deadweight loss just isn't present. So we can do this in terms of numbers of patents, or we can do it in terms of patent values also. There are ways of trying to estimate how valuable various patents are. I'll spare you the details. But basically, you can calculate sort of a weighting factor here, and then you can figure out what percentage of the value of patents in the world are being created in that category. So as you can see, there are a lot of mechanical patents that are not all that valuable, so actually they comprise a smaller percentage of all the value of patents out there. Whereas by comparison, there are somewhat fewer computer-related patents, but those that do exist are extremely valuable, and so they comprise a greater percentage of the total value of patents out in the world. And if we add up the same technological categories where we think two-part pricing operates, we see it's over 50%. So it might very well be that in over 50% of the sort of economic activity related to patents, two-part pricing is just, maybe it's not eliminated, at least substantially mitigating this deadweight loss problem. So this trade-off that we've been told was central to the patent world between deadweight losses and future innovation simply isn't the important trade-off that we're dealing with. So what is the important trade-off? That's what it is.
Okay, so what do you do in this world? Right, if there's no deadweight loss, there's no static inefficiency associated with patents, there's only dynamic efficiency. Is the answer to have infinite length patents? Right, that Steve Jobs controls your cell phone access for the rest of your life? His life? Sorry, that was bad. Apple lives forever. In any case, stepping back from that, what is the output? Is it infinite or is it something shorter? And we actually have a shorter length, so we want to figure out, does that actually make sense? And so what we want to revisit is what are the benefits under this new kind of way of thinking about things, where there's no static inefficiency. We have to think about the benefits and costs again. The benefits, again, are the same as before. It's the social benefit of innovation, except that you get a little bit more of it because instead of just getting that green box, you get the whole green triangle, which was bigger, right? Because two-part pricing allows the innovator to get more profits. So you're going to get innovation. The downside is the consumer gets nothing. It all goes to the innovator. The innovator extracts all that social surplus, and so you get social value from innovation, but it's all appropriated by the innovator. Okay? It's still social value. It's just the innovator gets it, right? So Apple's getting it and not us. That doesn't mean it's bad, just that Apple's getting it and not us. But what are the critics? That's not terribly surprising. I mean, we knew that, you know, at some point the innovator was going to get something, at some point we're going to get innovation. The question is, what's the downside now, right? I mean, the issue here is largely that a larger patent, a longer patent, a broader patent, kind of delays consumer surplus. Instead of getting consumer surplus at 20 years when patents expires, maybe you extend patents out to 30 years, and you got to wait 30 years before you start seeing competitive prices. The longer you go out, the less the consumers are going to get. Not the less the consumers are going to, not the less that society's going to get, but the less the consumers are going to get out of that total social surplus. It's all going to go to the innovator, very little to the consumer. And so the trade-off, if there is to be one, has to be framed in terms of the social value of innovation on the one hand, and redistribution on the other hand from innovators to consumers. Okay? It's about redistribution. Now, that has some interesting, brings up some interesting issues. This is a lot like the debate that we see in antitrust, where the question is, should we care about total surplus for all of society, producers and consumers, or should we care about just what the consumers are getting? And the recent trend is to care a little bit more. Recent trend meaning when we first started out, we're doing something else entirely. When the Chicago Antitrust School won out, we started saying total surplus. But then there's been a little bit retreat in antitrust where we're talking about what we care about actually is the portion that consumers get, not what everybody gets. Producers and consumers combined. And so here we're saying patents have the same sort of trade-off. Right? It's not about, you know, the choice you face is do I care about total surplus, what everybody gets, even if it all goes to the innovator? Or do I care about just the fraction that consumers get? That's the first thing. The second thing is, you have to be able to care about the distributed concerns, right? So normally when I say consumers versus producers, you think little guy consumer, big guy producer, right? Well, that makes a lot of sense in a world where, you know, it is a small cabal of people that own all the production. Or the consumers are all little guys, but that doesn't have to hold. Right? I bet you the average person that consumes an iPhone is actually quite wealthy. And so the standard rich, poor, redistributive concerns you have don't map on nicely to the consumers. Likewise, I bet you a lot of you maybe, if you own stock or you own an ETF or you own shares in a mutual fund, probably own a little bit of Apple. So you're actually the producer. Okay? So the distributive concerns are a little bit complicated because consumers are not necessarily poor, and the producers, you may be owners of the producer. And in those sorts of situations, right, when you own Apple shares, it's not obvious that the redistributive concern tells you that you ought to have short patents. You might want to have longer patents. And so while this is the main trade-off, you have to be a little bit careful about what that implies for exact length of patent. Okay? That is to say, you usually think about redistribution in terms of rich-poor. You have to think about it a little bit differently in this context. Okay? And by the way, that would also be true for antitrust. Maybe a topic for another paper. Okay, so now we've changed the trade-off. What do the graphs look like now? The graphs look like this. If you did a shorter patent, and remember this is time that you're on patent, the height is the total social surplus created. Actually, this height should appear a little bit larger than this height, for a reason that will become clear. Whereas before, the time that you're on patent, you had less surplus, but you split it between consumers and producers. Here, producers get it all under our optimal two-part pricing scheme. And they get it all the way up until here, and then consumers start getting it. That's the redistribution, right? Producers get a little bit less, and consumers get a little bit more if you have shorter patent life. If you have longer patent life, the producers get a little bit more, consumers get a little bit less, but this will be a little bit higher. Okay? That's the trade-off that you're facing. So now let's think about some other things that we want to think about, or we want to list a few things you should think about going forward. So first, a lot of you, I think, are going to wonder, well, really, do we only care about this dynamic efficiency versus static efficiency when we think about optimal patent length? You know, before we started thinking about this presentation, weren't there other things like patent races and patent tickets? So I think my view, and I think also Jonathan's view, but certainly my view is that these things are second-order importance. It's not obvious how bad patent races are, and as it turns out, the same thing we say are solutions to that are examples of two-part pricing are actually initially sold. The patent pools were initially sold as a problem to thickets. We can talk about that in Q&A. So again, what we want to say is there are a lot of other issues going on in patents, but I think we've keyed in on the first-order issues. And the next thing we want to think about is, going forward is, if you're one of those people that doesn't care about redistribution, or certainly not between producers and consumers, you care about rich-poor, but you don't think it maps out nicely to consumers and producers, you want longer patents, right? You want longer patents. And the last thing we want to say is that we've been couching everything in terms of patent length, just because it's easy to see, but you can make similar types of arguments for patent breadth, right? How wide a patent should stretch, okay, once it's granted. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop, leave that up, and open it up to Q&A.
That was perfectly clear.
Yeah.
James, go ahead.
Do you think that the optimal patent length should be allowed to vary across industries? I mean, for example, biotechnology is an industry that requires a lot of upfront, research and innovation. Maybe a longer patent in that sector may be justified, whereas a patent in another sector might require a shorter time for the inventor to reap the full cost of innovation.
Yeah, I think initially people used to say we don't want to have different patent rules for different areas because it's too hard to figure out what the returns to innovation are across these areas. But one of the nice implications of what we talked about is that there is an indicator that courts can verify, that legislators can verify, which is the existence of two-part pricing schemes, either health insurance or cross-licensing agreements or patent pools, that once you can see, that the costs of patents are severely diminished, distributive concerns aside. And if that's the case, then you do now have something objective to look at to say, for those industries, I want a slightly longer patent. Now, if you say within the set of industries that have two-part pricing, drugs for health insurance, but then some computer things that are covered by patent pools, within that, I still think it'd be kind of too hard to figure out you should have longer or shorter within them. But across two-part versus non-two-part pricing industries, I could see having longer patents in the two-part pricing industries.
So, and even if you can't make distinctions between industries, which would sort of be the first best idea, at minimum you might be able to say, look, these deadweight loss problems are not nearly as severe as people thought they were, so we could allow the patent term to creep a little bit longer across the board without maybe worrying so much about the deadweight loss costs that we're imposing on the other side.
It seems like there's a certain category of technology which wouldn't really benefit from longer patents because it eventually gets leapfrogged before the patent even runs out, like cassette tapes. We stop using those. And even if they have a longer patent term, they wouldn't really benefit anybody incentive to innovation.
Yeah, now the problem with, that's exactly right, right? If you're going to get leapfrog, if your effective patent life is determined by competition as opposed to when the law says your patent expires, because somebody comes up with better technology, then for sure extending patent life is not going to matter. Okay? And in fact, some people say there's a lot of this so-called creative destruction in pharmaceuticals, for example. A new drug comes out before the old drug's patent runs out. But there are also lots of examples of situations where the patent running out is a big deal for the company. And so what we end up with is a system where there's a probability that the length of the patent is not what's going to determine how long you get to have profits. It's going to be competition. And there's a probability that the length of the patent does matter. From an ex-ante perspective, before you do innovation, what that means is that not the patent length doesn't matter, but that it matters a little bit less to the amount of innovation that you have. In general, the more creative destruction you have, I think the less benefit there is to longer patent length, but doesn't mean zero patent length. Overall, a lot of creative destruction would imply shorter average patent length, even under our scheme. So it's a little bit orthogonal to this two-part pricing scheme, but I think it's important. The question is there a lot of creative destruction? Only one footnote I'd add to that. You have to ask why there's creative destruction in the first place. Right? Why it is that somebody invented another product, or why does it happen with a greater frequency before the patent life of the old product runs out? And it could be because they want the patent, the monopoly profits. And part of that's going to be how long they can get it. So let's not undersell the fraction of cases where your patent runs for as long as the patent life, because that's the thing that's motivating the leapfrog in the first place.
Sorry, can I jump into one?
Yeah,
I think the last thing that Anoop said about patent breadth is also really important here, right? So even if you have technologies like, let's say that the cassette tape technology is going to be dead long before the 20-year patent term runs out. Even if that's the case, there's still a way of giving the cassette tape inventor a longer patent term in those terms, and that's just to let them write a broader patent instead. So maybe they're not covering only cassette tapes, they're covering some other sort of recordable media as well. And so, and now, there are lots of reasons to object to that, and they're classically couched in terms we described, deadweight losses and the like. But if we thought to ourselves that these deadweight losses might not be such an issue, then we could think about one option of allowing broader patent scope so as to encourage more innovation on the part of people working in these industries, and not having to face the deadweight loss trade-off on the other side. So even if patent length is and so forth, we can sort of substitute for it with patent breadth instead.
If the assumption is that the patent is going to end sometime and we do switch to consumer surplus, is the discount rate of the innovators that we're using to calculate patent length? And if so, how do we calculate that discount rate?
I think that's kind of an orthogonal issue in the sense that it's a chance to calculate anybody's discount rate. But to keep matters simple, I think with people that are, we're not in a world where there's a lot of common sense innovators now these days. It's usually Apple and Coffee and things like that. For those guys, I'm comfortable using just the interest rates that they face, the cost of capital. Given that, that's the number that I would use. And I would use that whether we're talking about patents or any other topic for that matter, any other investments that they're making. Now, the bigger their discount rate, and that may also mean the bigger the interest rate is, okay? That means that that long stream of profits is worth a little bit less, right? The more you discount the future, the less a fixed stream of profits is going to be worth, because the stuff that's way down the line, you value less. And so that's going to be an important issue. To relate discount rates to what we're talking about, it's going to push down the return to having a longer patent life. Kind of like the probability that you're going to be leapfrogged. Okay? But that'll apply whether or not you're in a world, the old conventional wisdom, static versus dynamic efficiency, or in this world that we're talking about where you've got two-part pricing. In either one of them, that's the effect that you're going to get.
How, in the pharmaceutical patents related to health insurance, how does it impact the fact that there are people with pre-existing conditions or individual policyholders where they don't have pharmaceutical coverage? How would that sort of impact this thesis?
Good question. The less insurance you have, the less you have two-part pricing, and the more you have that single-part pricing, which leads to the deadweight loss. So when we say something like 80% of people have insurance, that's nominally have insurance. That may not cover all their symptoms. So what we want to figure out is what fraction of illnesses, of demand, is covered by insurance versus what fraction of demand is not covered by insurance. Now, I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I can think of reasons why it's smaller and larger. You can think of the reason why it's less than 83%. Some of the people that have insurance may also have exclusions or pre-existing conditions. Okay? and that could mean the number is lower than 83%. I'll give you two reasons why it could be higher than 83%. One is if you, like the new healthcare bill, one of the things to like about the healthcare bill is that it limits the exclusions on pre-existing conditions. So it's in fact made that insurance coverage even broader. And again, we mentioned that, as Jonathan mentioned, the more we move to universal care, the more we move to pricing scheme. The second thing is that if we weight that 83%, that's weighted by the fraction of people in society. Okay, that it's the number of people. Each person gets equal weight. But we know people in this room, on average, are consuming much less healthcare than the average person in the faculty lounge. Okay, there are differences across the population. As it turns out, the people that use less healthcare are also more likely to be in that 17% than the people that use a lot of healthcare. And so, for example, Medicare is the best example. Everybody on Medicare is covered, but they use a lot of drugs. So that would tend to push up that 83%. But I think your intuition is right. But the way that you should think about it in the context of the presentation is the fewer people, the larger the number of people that have health insurance or the broader health insurance coverage, the more are the number of people that are covered by two-part pricing schemes, and the less is the deadweight loss of patents associated with those with that sort of sector.
So I think that you said that the price of the one-time entry fee needs to be low enough to get all the consumers that you want in. Is that right? So is there a relationship between that price and the marginal cost, or are they unrelated or have related to each other?
I think my simple answer is unrelated. Unrelated.
Okay. So it could be higher or lower.
Higher or lower. You can imagine any combination of.
On the graph, they intersect. I just wondered if that was like just for the sake.
That was just the way I drew it.
Okay.
Yeah, you can have like very little surplus and then very high marginal cost, or vice versa, or any combination thereof. There's no kind of fundamental reason why those two things have to be linked.
I was wondering how your theory sort of interacts with international trade and different sort of patent regimes in different countries. Because at one level, it seems that differential pricing is practiced in different markets to cut down sort of deadweight loss, sort of pricing drugs lower in Africa or something. But also, it seems to me that these redistributive concerns you've talked about are also probably driving, say, shorter patent regimes in developing countries. That's sort of the justification often put forward. So, is there another way it interacts?
Yeah. So I think you're exactly right. These issues about how to price drugs in foreign countries relates exactly to this question about deadweight loss and trying to get as many people into the market as possible, right? So the goal of the drug company is to charge higher prices to Americans who can afford the drug more easily, and then lower prices to people abroad who are not able to, who can't pay such high prices for it, and thereby capture both parts of the market. A lot of the time when drug companies are refusing to sell drugs abroad, it's because they worry that they're going to sell it for a lower price abroad and it's going to be re-imported back into the United States. So that's just another example of attempted price discrimination. All they're trying to do is capture people at both sort of the high end of the market and the low end of the market. And and perfectly analogous to what we're talking about. I mean, one thing that's worth noting is that part of what facilitates this sort of attempted price discrimination, part of the reason why they can charge such high prices in the US for drugs, and it makes it therefore sort of more difficult to charge lower prices elsewhere, is that we've got systems like healthcare insurance in the United States that allow, that sort of avoid pricing people out of the market by establishing these sorts of two-part prices. So absent healthcare, the price for drugs in the US would probably have to drop. And these manufacturers would be able to sort of expropriate less of the surplus that they're creating by these drugs. Something like two-part pricing, by working to eliminate this deadweight loss, effectively drives up the price and therefore allows the producers to capture even more of the consumer surplus that they're creating with the drugs.
If I could just add one more thing to this. I think that in a world where if you lived in a world where the conventional wisdom is what, if you were motivated by the conventional wisdom, you would still see this differential pricing in the US versus developing countries, because a monopolist would like to price discriminate across countries. They'd like to charge less to the third world than they would to the first world. Okay? And again, gray markets is exactly the reason why you don't get it. But you'd see the exact same sort of thing with two-part pricing that you would see in that context. It's just that what the company would do is you get less inefficiency in both markets. You charge a higher upfront fee for both markets, but smaller per unit fee in both markets as well. So even conditional on the fact that you've got different types of demand in these two countries, you would still want a two-part pricing scheme in each of those. But neither two-part pricing nor one-part pricing solves this problem of gray markets.
Given the larger producer surplus, why don't we see evidence of two-step pricing across more industries?
That's a great question.
I don't know. I have to think about it for a second.
So here's the thing. You have to, it's not easy to do two-part pricing. What you have to do is you have to know, and here I'm going to put up the figure, because I think this is going to help illustrate some of the challenges here. And our claim isn't that two-part pricing is easy. Our claim is that two-part pricing is remarkably common, despite the fact that it's not easy. So let me just go back to the standard two-part pricing. Or did I go too far?
You're looking for the supply
Yeah,
curve?
it's a little bit earlier,
right? Yeah, you keep going back. There you go.
There we go. Okay. Here's why two-part pricing is really hard. You have to know how much an individual consumer values the good if they buy a competitive amount of that good. So you have to know what the size of this green triangle is, right? You get it too small, you're not extracting all the profits. It doesn't worry us as much, but it means that you're going to have less innovation. If you price it too big, we worry about it because it's that same deadweight loss that we're seeing before, okay? And so you've got to get that triangle right. That seems to mean, wow, it's really hard, right, to implement this scheme. Because I don't know what your triangle looks like. Even if I was an innovator, I invented a really cool thing, a cool widget. Okay, so how do we solve that? I mean, not only do I know what you want, but I also, the difficulty is that you may want the product, your green triangle may be a different size than your green triangle. And if I can only charge one green triangle, then I've got a problem, right? I'm either going to extract too little from you and just right for you, or I'm going to charge just right for you and price you out of the market, right? So then you see how what the complications are there. Well, here are a few nice things. First, I know that I can keep you both in the market if I charge it at the lower, whatever the lower entry price is, right? And that's safer, because at least I don't lose out that green triangle for the guy that I priced out. The second thing is, while you guys may have different valuations for a given product, one of the things that we observe is that rarely does this two-part pricing scheme operate just for one product. It usually operates for a bundle of products, okay? And when you have a bundle of products, one of the nice features that we figured out is if it's a bundle of things for which you have relatively independent demand, your average demand is going to look very similar. So if I have a bundle of 10 patents that I'm selling you, and while for each individual one you may have a higher demand than you do, okay? For that bundle, you're more likely to have similar demands, okay? And that's why we see health insurance that covers a lot of patents, all the drug patents, a lot of device patents. That's why we see patent pools cover a whole bunch of different IP, like individual patents within them. Even cross-licensing, the licensing schemes can cover lots of different things. Okay, so that's the second thing that helps. The third thing I want to point out is you want to figure out, even if you don't get it perfect, would I prefer to have somebody pricing here, which by the way it can also be in some sense imperfect, but would I rather have a guy pricing here and getting a lot of deadweight loss, or trying to get this big triangle, maybe hitting it a little bit low, and not getting it quite right, but getting less deadweight loss. And I think that's the basic idea here. We need something close to two-part pricing, I think, to beat out the monopoly pricing. Okay, last thing that I'll end my answer here, which is, you also want to see, just look at the real world. You might say, oh my gosh, it's really, really challenging. How could this be done? But as it turns out, it is done. I know that everybody in this room is covered by health insurance, because I think the university requires it. That's a nice thing. Makes it safe. You're all covered by two-part pricing on drug patents, right? Your marginal, your copay, even if you don't like it, is pretty close to marginal cost. It's not exactly marginal cost, but pretty close. Even if it was a little bit higher than marginal cost, it wouldn't be as high as this big triangle. It would be a little bit smaller. Right? In the real world, we see these schemes covering lots of people and lots of IP. That's really helpful to us. So even if you think it's going to be tough, in fact, a lot of people are members of this sort of stuff.
So deadweight loss comes from the people who
would be able to pay the competitive price, but aren't able to pay the monopolist price. And you guys said that the essence of two-part pricing is that the entry price has to be something that these people who would be otherwise deadweight loss, the price would be something that they can afford. So how is it that they can afford what seems to be a higher entry price? I mean, if you look at the graph, like the price of entry is higher than the monopolist price for one-part pricing. So
you should probably talk about this graph, and I can say something more general.
He'll talk about the words, I'll talk about the pictures. I was always good at picture books. So it seems strange, right?
Yeah.
But the key thing to recognize is that if we go back, actually, there's a quicker way to jump back here. Slow, there we go. Let's suppose you just charge here, this amount, right? One of the things that most people ignore is that each person is generating a lot of profits. Now, you don't write accounting statements suggesting, oh, I made a lot of money. They only charged me $100 for this iPhone. I was willing to pay $600, right? But that is a profit to you. You're willing to pay $6 for it, but you got it for $100. And so all we're saying is the monopolist figures that out and says, I could have charged you $600, right? And with the two-part pricing scheme, so in my household, there are, because there are multiple members, me and my wife, I'm going to lie now, she actually uses BlackBerries, but let's just suppose that she used an iPhone. We'd buy 2 iPhones, right? We would have gotten $600. Let's suppose that each of us valued the iPhone at $600, but could get it for $100. We would each get $600 of consumer surplus, right? Apple could charge us $1,200 more, right? Because we'd like 2 of them, and that would be the amount that they'd be able to extract this red triangle, right? It seems like, how could it be that you're charging less, but you're actually getting more? It's because the entry fee captures all that hidden surplus that you're not accounting for. The unit price will be lower. So you'll still look like, so let's suppose a monopolist will charge $400 for an iPhone. A single price monopolist will charge $400 for an iPhone. A two-part pricing one would say, hey, me and my wife, they charged me $1,200 to enter, and then they charged me $100 per iPhone going on. So it'd be less per unit, but more upfront. Does that make sense?
I mean, so how does that work in terms of iPhones? Because you don't have like a bundle that you're purchasing,
No,
or
that's
like
right, but in
access to something.
In iPhones, it's not you that did it. It's Apple that did it. Apple licensed that for you. So Apple joined some patent pools or had some cross-licensing scheme. They paid that fixed amount, but they did it for all their consumers, which they bundled together, by the way. Right? So instead of bundling individual products, they bundled consumers and said, here's the valuation we think it's worth. Right? That's their green. For them, that would be the green. Would be that red triangle. But now they're going to up here. Really, we should be able to do this. There we go. That's what they paid their patent suppliers, and then they basically got charged, I think, probably close to zero from unit cost. And then when they sold to you, the question was, how did they allocate this fixed cost, which they paid to the supplier? Now, we're getting to advanced topics. They do something called Ramsay Pricing, where they allocate it to the people that are least elastic. But one of the nice things about that is to say, I'm not going to change their response to, they're not going to change their demand in response to this, having to pay part of this fixed cost. As a result of that, they're actually going to get something that's much more efficient than a monopoly price. But that's with the additional wrinkle of Ramsay Pricing when you have retailers that are paying. But the short answer to your question is, Apple did this, and then sold you a more affordable product. It could have been worse.
So if the monopolist is making what would otherwise be the deadweight loss triangle in basically excess profits through price discrimination, that means that the returns on rent seeking are probably correspondingly higher. Is the intuition, if this were just the government awarding some sort of license, we might be concerned that would cause deadweight loss by being dissipated through rent-seeking behaviors. The intuition that the patent law regime's first-of-time rule makes the process relatively robust against rent dissipation through rent-seeking.
So I think that intuition is exactly right. I mean, the thing is that the rent-seeking behavior we're talking about here is innovative activity. So we want to encourage it to some degree. So now we're worried that there will be patent races, and then people will dissipate all those rents, destroy them. So that's basically the patent race theory as a whole. And a lot of people think that that's a driving force, and so their idea is let's grant patents really early and just cut the race off as much as we can so people don't have a chance to dissipate all those profits away. That may or may not be right. It's sort of just hard to tell empirically. And the reason is, sometimes we want people to engage in these races because now they're going to innovate more quickly and bring products to market more usefully. Sometimes we'd rather they didn't because they're going to spend so much on research and development that all the profits are going to disappear. If this problem of patent races is correct, then we might want to make other further adjustments and grant patents very early on a very broad inventive scope. But it might very well be that we don't actually worry about races like that.
The only thing I'd add is when people ask me that question, I say, we have competition for restaurants. Lots of people put up restaurants, pay the fixed cost of setting up a restaurant, right? And some of them succeed, some of them fail. And some of them fail in the same neighborhood as another one succeeds just because they're not as good. Now, the question you got to ask yourself is, do I think that's a good process or a bad process? I think most people, and we hope that after you're done here in Chicago, you will agree that that's a good process, right? We want the competition because it gets you a better product. Maybe it gets you faster innovation in restaurants, maybe it gets you better food, okay, or more interesting food, or more innovative food, whatever it happens to be. The waste is part of the process of getting you there. If you didn't have the waste, then you might not get no good. Okay? Now, the flip side of that you got to ask is, well, if you're comfortable with limiting patents because you're worried about races, you have to ask, am I comfortable with doing something like capping the profits that restaurants can make in order to make sure there are not too many restaurants? That seems fraught with a whole bunch of other dangers. Right? What's the right amount? Are you going to get the right innovation? Does the government know exactly what individual consumers want? It's very difficult. So what we decided is we think competitive races for non-innovative stuff like food is a good idea. All we're saying is it's kind of the same sort of question for innovation with patents. So I like to throw my hands up in the air sometimes. Yeah, as you do. You two too, don't you? With patent races. I just don't know the answer. But I mean, I think the same intuition I have about restaurants, I'd apply to patents, for sure.
But patent challenges are sort of, it would also increase returns to challenging patents, right?
Yeah.
So that related, because that's not necessarily
for sure, but I'm guessing the amount of money in litigation expenditure. So there are two costs of patent litigation. You want to take this one because this is really up your alley.
Go ahead.
So there are two problems. There are two problems with patent litigation. One is the easy one, which is I waste money on lawyers, which we know is never a waste, but other people think it's a waste. So transaction costs, and the second one is that you actually decrease innovative returns in case you make a mistake in allocating that patent, right? The judge is not doing a good job of allocating it. But I think that those costs are probably small. I mean, I can speak to the first one more than the second one because I just don't think, the amount of money spent on lawyers, all combined across all industries, compares even to the amount of surplus generated by innovative drug patents. And that seems. The second issue, it just depends on how accurate courts are. I'm not sure we agree on this. I tend to think the courts are not that accurate, which hurts me.
Oh, we agree. No,
I agree. It's fantastic.
No, absolutely. You want courts to be accurate so that they're allocating these patents and the rights properly. And then if you figure if the courts are accurate, sure. And if there are large returns to invalidating the patent, if the courts are pretty accurate, then people are going to bring a lot of challenges. And, the more accurate the courts, the more meritorious the challenges. But those court costs, these costs of sort of figuring out who really ought to have the rights to that invention, those are going to be just absolutely dwarfed by all the other costs involved in innovation. Oh, yes.
So, as the two-part pricing creates more profits, not for the innovator, if you're pulling all those things, all these resources together, doesn't that mean that there's not only are there greater profits for the innovator, but there's also less risk, less innovation risk? And so wouldn't that just mean that the better this works, the less necessary it is? Or would that suggest that they would be pooling beforehand, just going to one big bakery and reducing that and then not needing this?
I mean, if you're the innovator, you still need to create something that's valuable to someone in some regard, right? You're not going to make any money selling it on the market, or you're not going to make any money licensing it to anyone unless it's at least somewhat valuable, right? And of course, the patents that enter these pools are going to be patents that are, generally speaking, fairly low level of value. If you've got some singular killer patent, you're not going to stick it in the patent pool and license it along with 1,000 other patents at a very low charge. So people still want to innovate. I mean, I guess there is a fear that everyone will be going out and filing for a gazillion patents, figuring that they can just throw them into the patent pool later on. But that patent pool is only worth what you can get someone to pay for it. And so if all the patents you're filing for aren't that valuable in the first place, you're not going to make that much money licensing the pool out. So there's still always this incentive to actually come up with something worthwhile for someone, so that they'll actually want to pay you something to require it.
On the second to last slide, when we were comparing the value, the total value across time, compared for the short term versus the long term, why was the total value of the long term patents necessarily higher? I'm not sure if I caught that.
Yeah, just because we think it might encourage more innovation. Okay. So that's the only reason, right? So again, usually we're trading off more innovation versus greater deadweight loss. Here we think if we've eliminated to some degree the deadweight loss, what we're buying is more innovation with a longer patent term. Now the issue is just we're trading off between producers and consumers. Okay, so I think unfortunately we're out of time, but thank you all very much.